afraid that when you look at the case, there are a number of conclusions that one can immediately draw, and that is, of course, first of all, Andrew, that I pay tribute to the emergency services, the reaction of the police, the public. Our sympathies, of course, are with the victims and their families. But although it is very early, I think it is legitimate to look at the case in the way that you just have and to ask ourselves exactly that question. How could he be out so early? The answer is, I'm afraid, that he was out because he was on automatic early release. When the judges reviewed his sentence in 2012, they had no option but to comply with the law that Labour brought in 2008, which meant effectively... You
say Labour, you've been in power for a decade.
Effectively, that he was out, they had to comply with the law as it stood, and he was out in 8 years. And this was a guy, don't forget, that Judge Wilkie said was a very serious jihadi. And that's why when I've been in office for 120 days.
Your party's been in power for 10 years.
That's why when I stood on the steps of Downing Street, I said we were putting more money into policing. But I also said in August that we would no longer allow the automatic early release of serious and violent offenders. And what we're doing now is there is a bill which was in the Queen's speech to prevent automatic early release. And as you know...
There is nothing in your manifesto that would have changed this case, is there? Nothing in your manifesto.
There's a bill in the Queen's speech to prevent automatic early release, which I have campaigned against. Yeah. And it was because, to get to your question, Andrew, it was because of automatic early release that this individual was out on the streets.
And that came about because...
And had it not been...
His original sentence was an indeterminate sentence to protect IPP, to direct the public. That was abolished by the Conservatives under your colleague Ken Clarke when he was Justice Secretary. Was that a mistake?
No, what we were doing...
Why not?
Because he was sentenced under Labour's system that allowed him to be released automatically,
he was sentenced under IPP.
Having served only 8 years. And when the judges, Judge Leveson and others, reviewed his case in 2012, they determined that he could come out effectively after only 8 years.
Your government got rid of the IPPs in 2012. You got rid of the IPPs in 2012, and here is what the Ministry of Justice said about that. He said there was going to be new determinate sentences. This will see more dangerous criminals given life sentences and others spending longer periods in prison with tough conditions on release.
Absolutely.
It did not happen.
What we have said, and what I have said since coming to office in the last 3 or 4 months, is that I think this whole system of automatic early release, which was brought in by Labour, and it was under that system.
You've been in power for 10 years.
It was under that. Sorry, I've only been in office for 120 days.
So,
and by the way,
you're leader of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has been in power for 10 years.
One of the reasons we're having this election is because we have a Queen's speech that was blocked by Parliament, amongst other things, not least Brexit. We need to get it done so that we can move forward. I think it's ridiculous, I think it's repulsive that individuals as dangerous as this man should be allowed out after serving only 8 years. And that's why we are going to change the law.
We were told that he was under strict conditions when he was let out. What strict conditions were they?
Well, there are a number of conditions attached to his licence, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but he had very strict conditions. I do, I've seen them, but let's be frank, they were nothing that was capable of being done could have changed the way he behaved.
Licence conditions
could have changed the way he behaved. The problem was that this individual should have been in prison. And there was no question.
And under the Conservatives, he was let out. Under the Conservatives, he was let out. This was the Conservative decision.
Because of changes
You've been in power for 10 years.
Because of changes to the law that were brought in by the Labour Party that I voted against.
You're in power for 10 years and you've done nothing about it in 10 years.
That Jeremy Corbyn voted in favour of.
For 10 years, you've done nothing about it.
He voted in favour of automatic early release.
For 10 years, you've done nothing about it.
You cannot retrospectively change
the basis on which... For 10 years, you have done nothing about it.
Sorry, that you cannot change the basis on which someone is sentenced. You're talking about Usman Khan. I'm talking now about the future.
For 10 years, you've done nothing to change the system or toughen it. Now you're saying,
about what we are going to do. I've been in office for 120 days. We're going to bring in tougher sentences for serious sexual and violent offenders and for terrorists. We put more money into counter-terrorism.
Well, let's talk about your record.
That is what we're going to do.
The chief inspector
absolutely deplore the fact that this man was out on the streets. I think it's absolutely repulsive, and we are going to take
that
action
repulsive thing
against it.
Happened under the Conservatives. It was Conservative legislation and a Conservative regime under which. Would you like to apologise to people for the fact that that happened?
I must respectfully repeat to you that his release was necessary under the law because of the automatic early release scheme under which he was sentenced. That was the reality, and that was brought in by Labour with the support of Jeremy Corbyn and the rest of the Labour Party.
Earlier this year,
I opposed it both in 2003. I opposed it both in 2003 and in 2008. And now that I am Prime Minister, I'm going to take steps to make sure that people are not released early when they have
I do need to ask you some questions.
Sexual,
that's the way,
violent or terrorist
That's
offences.
the way it goes. In 2019, the Chief Inspectorate of Probation said of this of the Probation Service, again, under the Conservatives, he said probation is not working as it should, it's not delivering well enough for some of the most troubled and sometimes troublesome people in society when they and the wider public deserve better. Again, would you like to apologise to people what's happened to the Probation Service under the Conservatives?
Obviously, I think we should be investing more in the criminal justice system, and I disagree, by the way.
So you made a mistake?
No, I think
as a government?
No. Look, go back to the history of the last 10 years or so. Labour left the finances of this country in utter ruins. And we were, of course, responsible for governing sensibly. I was Mayor of London for most of that period. But the Conservative government, yes, of course, it governed sensibly and prudently. What we're doing now, under this new One Nation Conservative administration,
it's a new
we are
administration,
investing.
Is it?
Yes, and we are. It's
really
new
important.
in our approach, and it's new in the way we will tackle the issues of public services. We're investing massively in the NHS.
You are asking for a fourth Conservative term.
Policing. Yes.
You can't shrug off the record of the Conservatives as you do that and say, it's somebody else, not me. No, you can't do that.
No, of course not. But don't forget, Labour said there's no money left in 2010. They had a letter saying that they'd effectively bankrupted the economy. Now, after some prudent and sensible management of the economy, we are putting huge sums into our NHS, into policing, into tackling terror, by the way. I disagree with Shami Chakrabarti, and I disagree with Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm sure you do, but let me ask you about
sentences for these people. I believe they deserve condign punishment, and that is what they will get.
Let me ask you about Mr. Khan and what happened there. First of all, again, what are the conditions? People need to know what are the conditions that he was obliged.
Well, there were various conditions under which he was obliged to. He had mentors. He had restrictions on his mobile phone. He had restrictions on internet access, and so on. But
not enough.
But in my view, absolutely not. But the key issue, Andrew, is that he was allowed out early.
How many other people are in the same position?
He was allowed out early. And there was no, and this is very important, it was nothing to do with parole, it was nothing to do with the probation service.
So how many people are in the same position?
Legally, there was no way of stopping him from coming out early on the basis on which he was sentenced. So as for your question about how many others there are probably about 74.
Okay, you're trying to avoid my question by carrying on talking.
No,
let me just ask you again.
Let me ask you again. You said how many others?
Okay.
74.
74 other people. What are you doing about them now?
Yes. What we're doing there is we've taken a lot of action, as you imagine, in the last 48 hours to... I don't want to go into the operational details.
But you can give people an indication.
Well, we're doing... I'm sure people can imagine what we're doing to ensure that the 74 other individuals who've been let out early on the basis of this Labour change to the legislation, they are being properly invigilated so to ensure there is no threat
to the public.
So when you heard this, and we took that action
So when you heard this, you were concerned that this kind of thing could happen again and again and again, given the number of people who are getting out now?
Well, I do think there is an issue, as I've said, about automatic early release. I think it's wrong for serious sexual offenders. I think it's wrong for violent offenders. I think it's wrong for terrorists. And so I disagree with Jeremy Corbyn and Shami Chakrabarti when it comes to having shorter sentences for these people.
And you've got a new regime, but it's only happened in the last 48 hours. It's not in the manifesto. It's not something you were talking about before this happened. Well, you've had 10 years in government to get this regime for violent criminal terrorists right, and as a government, you have patently failed.
No, we've obviously invested a great deal in counter-terrorism in the spending review. We put another 160 million into counter-terrorism. We support MI5.
Hasn't worked though, has it?
We support, and by the way, Jeremy Corbyn has said he would disband MI5.
Hasn't worked.
I get back to my point.
Let's go back to the record.
The reason this killer was out on the streets, was because of automatic early release, which was brought in by a left-wing.
And you had 10 years in office to do something about it, and you didn't.
But
10 years.
Not in the case of this individual, because after all, he had been sentenced under the existing law in 2010. Well, that was the reality, and you should acknowledge that.
Let's look at what happened to him.
You can't go back.
Let's look at what happened to him in the last 10 years, where he was in the last 10 years, which is in the prison system, which has been pretty much disastrous under the Conservatives. Let's go through a few figures. Suicides under the Conservatives in the prison system up by 50%. Assaults on staff tripled in that period. Prisoner assaults doubled, self-harm more than doubled.
And that is why this new Conservative administration, Andrew, is putting £2.5 billion into our prison service.
It's not a new Conservative administration. It is the Conservative Party which has been in power for 10 years.
But we take a different approach.
So it's not the Conservative Party that we look back at.
I'm a new Prime Minister. We take a different approach. We're putting £2.5 billion into our prisons. We want to have, unlike Shami Chakrabarti, we want to have an extra...
Tories doing all this stuff for the prison service. Can
I tell you what we're doing? We want to have an extra 10,000 places. And the reason that we are confident in our ability to do that is because we have a strong economy. We can manage the economy sensibly, and we will not rack up public debt so that we take a sledgehammer to the resilience of the UK economy.
Okay, enough of all of that. Do you know
the disaster that the Labour Party would be?
Do you know how many magistrates and Crown Courts you have closed as a party in the last 10 years? Do you know how many have been closed in England and Wales?
We will be making investments in the criminal justice system across the board.
Do you know how many courts? Okay, I'll tell you. It's nearly 300 magistrate and Crown Courts that you have closed as the Conservatives across this country. It's an astonishing record.
We, of course, understand that now is the time to make investments not just in the NHS, not just in policing, as we are doing, not just in the education service, but also in our criminal justice system.
Okay.
We're putting more money into counter-terror. Jeremy Corbyn wants to scrap MI5.
I'm not interested in Jeremy Corbyn. I'm interested in you.
MI5 is responsible for keeping us safe. MI5 monitors thousands of people, such as Usman Khan.
I'm interested in you and your record. The record on prisons is appalling. You mentioned the NHS. You have, again, a terrifyingly bad record on the NHS. The highest number of patients on waiting lists ever. The worst performance on record for treating people within 18 weeks. The worst A&E performance since targets began. Missing targets again on cancer patients being seen. That is a terrible record.
The NHS is doing a fantastic job under terrific pressure, and I do not for 1 minute deny
all of those things are true, are they not?
I do not for 1 minute deny the pressure that the NHS is under, but that is why we are so determined to make huge investments in the NHS. The largest in modern memory, £34 billion, and you're going to. I know what you're going to say.
Nurses and hospitals.
We're building.
Not true what you said before, was it?
We're upgrading 20 hospitals and building 40 new ones, and you're going to say, oh, well, it's only 6. Actually, that's not true.
No, it's seed money for business plans.
The seed money for 40 new hospitals.
Okay,
and as a result
Prime Minister,
of the
one thing we can all agree
taken by this government, there will be 40 more hospitals in 10 years' time. I'm immensely proud of that.
One thing we can all agree
on for this country.
I'm sorry, but in terms of the misuse of language, one thing we can both agree on, I'm sure, is that seed money for a business plan is not a hospital. When you say I'm putting in seed money for a business plan, it's not a hospital.
It's not.
Seed money for 36 business plans is not 36 new hospitals.
Of course not, Andrew, but you don't commit seed money unless you have a convincing case and a rationale for building that hospital, unless you're determined to go on and do it. And that is what we are going to do. And you mentioned 50,000 nurses. And
of
again,
which 19,000, as you know, are not new. Agreed.
Absolutely.
So a mistake to say 50,000, actually.
No, because unless we put that investment in now, there would not be 50,000 more nurses, because the 19,000 that you correctly identify would not be retained in the system. Now, all this we want to get on and do. We have a fantastic agenda for this country. I want to have tougher sentences for serious violent criminals. I want to be investing in our NHS. I want to take this.
Well,
we're a very ambitious government.
The NHS was under huge pressure, and that's right. And one of the reasons is the huge pressure of social care. Here's what you said outside Downing Street very, very soon after you first became Prime Minister. You said, my job is to protect you and your parents or grandparents from the fear of having to sell your home to pay for the costs of care.
Yes.
And so I am announcing now on the steps of Downing Street that we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan we have prepared. Where is that plan?
Yes, well, I'll tell you. First of all, and we will fix the crisis in social care, and you're absolutely right, that the interface between the NHS, who do an incredible job, and the social services and local councils is one of the most difficult areas of care. So what we're doing is we're investing, first of all, this new government's put 1.5 billion in to help local councils.
Yes, that's not a plan.
But that's greatly, it does a lot in the short term. Then every year, for the next 5 years, we'll put an additional 1 billion in so that we can recruit the carers that we need, so that local councils are helped, and £1 billion is useful. I accept that the full plan needs to be developed, Andrew. And
so when you said you've got a plan, you haven't got a plan, had you?
Actually, I think there is an emerging national consensus about this, and that we are getting ready for, as it were, a beverage moment in our country when people understand that we do need as a nation to tackle this issue. And what we want to do is to reach across politics, to bring people together, to take the
So you want to go to the Labour Party, you accuse of being wild Marxists, and get them to agree something with you. You want to go to the Liberal Democrats, who you don't agree with about tax, and get them to agree.
There are plenty of things we don't agree about, but I think on this issue...
On this particular issue, they want to raise a penny on income tax.
I think on this issue there is a growing national consensus, and it will be important to work on that issue together. And what we will do is we'll ensure we have no one who is forced to sell their home to pay for the cost of their care, and everybody will have dignity and security in their old age. Those are
great aspirations.
Can I just make
but they're not a plan. Those are great aspirations. They're not a plan. You said you had a plan, and you don't have a plan. Let's move on.
None of those things.
Let's move on to something entirely different.
None of those things are remotely achievable unless we get Brexit done and move this country forward. And forgive me for repeating it, but it is absolutely true.
As everyone can hear right now, you're a man who enjoys using words. You're a very literate man. You had wonderful libraries when you were growing up. You had wonderful libraries at Eton and Oxford. Does the rest of the country deserve to have very good libraries as well?
It certainly does. And if I look at
So why have you closed 500 libraries around the country?
I'm afraid, well, very often local authorities, and yes, we want to be spending more, we want to be supporting local authorities, but some local authorities have been able to manage their finances so as to open libraries. I'll give you the example of my own borough of Hillingdon in West London, where they've opened libraries in the last
around the country,
5 years.
500 have gone because of a halving of the budgets for local authorities. 500 and swimming pools.
And I love libraries, and I want to see them properly used, and they perform a fantastic variety of services for the community, and they're wonderful, wonderful places. I want to invest in libraries, but we can only do that when we get the economy really motoring, and at the moment we have a huge drag anchor on this country, which is why we're having this election, which is our inability to get Brexit.
I'm going to come on to Brexit in just a minute, but you voted for the freeze in in-work benefits. Now, partly as a result of that, there are more than 4 million children in this country living in poverty. Are you proud of that?
We're ending that freeze, as you know.
So you've freezed it for 10 years, and now you say we should be grateful because it's ending.
Actually, there are 400,000 fewer children in poverty than there were in 2010. We are taking steps to alleviate poverty. The gap between rich and poor has actually diminished. But Andrew, I'm not going to hide it from you that this is something that I care about and I want to see progress on.
Well,
that's why
we need to see some progress, don't we? Because after 10 years,
that's why we're lifting the living wage by its biggest ever increase. That's why we're cutting taxes for people on low incomes, income tax
after 10 years
for 31 million people. And I know you don't want me to talk about the risk.
So let's come on to what you want. Let's come on to what you want to talk about.
Until a real risk, which is the risk is that you have a Corbyn-Sturgeon coalition that would put up taxes.
Okay, we're talking
as they have admitted.
Please listen to my questions because we're talking about you.
People on low incomes as £20,000 a year.
Can you try to listen to my questions because we're talking about you and your government.
Yes.
On Brexit, will there be tariffs and checks on goods moving from Northern Ireland into Great Britain?
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
That's not what your Brexit secretary says, and he's looked at the law and he says there will have to be checks.
No.
So Stephen Barclay is wrong about that.
The beauty of our Brexit...
Stephen Barclay is your Brexit secretary.
Yes.
He said the exit summary declarations will be required in terms of Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
There will be no
He's
tariffs.
wrong about that.
No, absolutely. There will be no tariffs and there will be no checks. And what we will ensure is that the whole of the UK, Northern Ireland and the rest of us can come out. And the advantage of the
talking about paperwork, which is going to affect Northern Ireland businesses both ways.
The advantage of the Conservative this election is we have 635 candidates who have all signed up, and they haven't been lobotomized, Andrew. They've all signed up perfectly freely from all spectrum for the
Behind your deal.
A very, very good deal, which enables us to come out on January the 31st. It's a great deal for our country. We want to get it done. If we can get it with a working majority...
I'm sorry, let me ask you, if you don't mind, another question. That'd be very kind of you.
Please.
In your withdrawal agreement, which you've negotiated, how many EU directives and regulations are going to apply to the people of Northern Ireland that don't apply to the rest of us? How many?
That will be a matter for the people of Northern Ireland.
No, it's not. It's in your withdrawal. Withdrawal declaration.
As you know, there is a period.
Annex 2, and the number is 300 declarations and regulations applying to Northern Ireland and not to the rest of us.
You're missing the point. You're missing the point.
It's in your annex. It's your document.
You're missing the point. The point is that Northern Ireland and the whole of the rest of the UK will be able to come out, do free trade deals, do things differently. We'll have free ports in Northern Ireland, we'll be able to cut VAT on sanitary products in Northern Ireland. All the advantages of Brexit will be there. Yes, for a period...
300 more regulations.
Northern Ireland can remain in alignment with the rest of the EU if they choose to do so. If after 4 years the people of Northern Ireland decide that those regulations that you cite are not suitable for them, they automatically fall away. That alignment automatically. Do you understand the point?
No, I don't really, because for the lifetime of the next Parliament we're about to elect, there will be 300 regulations and directives from the EU which apply to Northern Ireland, which don't apply to the rest of us. And that is the truth, and it's going to affect Northern Ireland business, and that's not what you told them.
If they don't like it, and if they don't want to be in alignment, then they automatically fall away.
Let me ask you about.
Do you understand that point?
Let me ask you about the overarching financial problem.
The reason for doing that.
The overarching financial problem
is so that we solve the problem of the Northern Irish border.
You just keep going on and on and on. You're chuntering. I need to ask you about the money.
You're interrupting.
So the money.
I think people might be quite interested in my answers, but as well as your questions. But go on.
The promise is. That you've given is there will be no rises in taxes for most people under the Conservatives, and you're not going to increase borrowing under the Conservatives, but you are going to spend money in specific areas such as policing and the NHS that you described. Yes. The problem is that if there is any slight bump or hesitation in growth during the lifetime of the next Conservative government, you are scuppered. You can't spend more plans, and therefore for an awful lot of people who are dependent on public services, voting Conservative might be too much of a risk.
No, we've made it very clear that we're making record investments in the NHS, £34 billion. The NHS budget will go up by about a third between 2018 and 2023.
What about making the sums add up?
And I think I've explained the nurses, and of course the sums will add up.
Right.
If you look at our budget, at our manifesto, it is fully costed. I must draw.
I'm sorry. Let me look.
Can I draw the distinction between the Labour manifesto and the Labour manifesto?
No, you can't. You absolutely can't, because I need to ask about you and your views. You have said that it'd be one bounce and you're out on Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Your candidate, Carl McCartney, an election candidate, has had multiple retweets of Tommy Robinson. He's still inside the Conservative Party. Your candidate, Anthony Brown, has suggested Muslim leaders at the time of Iraq had divided loyalties. He's still inside. Not many bounces. They're still inside the Conservative Party.
There is an independent process which needs to consider all such accusations of prejudice of any kind, and we're ruthless about that. And if people are convicted, then they're out. And we're very, very very clear about that. And what we are also having is a general inquiry into prejudice of all kinds within the Conservative Party. Well, and I must say, I think there is a very sharp distinction between what we're doing and what Labour has failed to do in clamping down on anti-Semitism.
Because there was prominent conservative,
yes.
when you give me an answer, but there was a prominent conservative who said to any non-Muslim reader of the Quran, Islamophobia, fear of Islam, seems a natural reaction and indeed exactly what that text is intended to provoke. Judged purely on its scripture, to say nothing of what is preached in the mosques, it is the most viciously sectarian of all religions in its heartlessness towards unbelievers. That was Boris Johnson. Do you stand by that?
Look, people are always going to drag out bits and pieces that I've written over the years in order to distract from the fundamental issues at this election. I have a record of campaigning for against prejudice of all kinds. Indeed, I'm proud to say my great-grandfather knew the Quran off by heart. And what we do in our Conservative Party is refuse to allow people to get away with prejudice and discrimination. What I think the people of this country want to know, and if you'll let me answer the let me make some points rather than
quickly.
What the people of this country want to know is what is our programme for government. Our programme for government is to get this country forward, get Brexit done, and take this country forward.
I am trying to avoid the speeches. Can I ask you about something else? Why are you avoiding being interviewed by Andrew Neil?
Because I think we've got a perfectly brilliant Andrew
it's a different
interviewing
audience.
Here.
You're absolutely right, but it's a different audience. I am doing on this programme interviews with all the party leaders, including yourself. Andrew Neil is trying to do interviews with all the party leaders in an evening slot with a different audience. Everybody else has done it. Why won't you?
He couldn't have a more brilliant agent, if I may say so, than you. But if you really want to, I think what the people of this country want to know is what is our programme for government.
It would be graceful and decent if you were able to say now, I will do an Andrew Neil interview.
I'm perfectly happy to be interviewed by any interviewer called Andrew from the BBC.
Are you going to be meeting Donald Trump this week?
We will make sure that. By the way, I've done interviews with. I did a 2-hour-long phone. I've done TV debates. No previous Prime Minister has done one-on-one TV debates.
Are you going to meet Donald Trump this week?
I am, of course I'm going to meet the President of the United States. He's coming to the NATO summit.
Are you worried that he's going to say something embarrassing?
Look, I'm very pleased.
We're out of time.
I'm very pleased that we have great relations with the United States.
We are out of time.
And
thanks to all my guests.
And unlike Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, who would abandon NATO, we want to strengthen our defences.
Prime Minister, we're out of time. Thank you so much for talking to us. Now, that's all my guests. Thanks for